If you watched our previous episode, then you know we are talking about mortgages, which are super exciting. This episode, I think, is very critical because we're going to talk about housing affordability. Like, how do you know what you can afford? And a lot of people would be shocked, perhaps, to know that when you go to a lender to talk to them about buying a home, and they ask you, what you're comfortable with paying, they're going to get information from you, like your social security number, what you currently make per year, if you have any additional income, if you have a spouse that you're adding. They're gonna get all this information from you, and then they're gonna give you a number. And where does that number come from? I think it's the first most important thing to realize. And what that is your debt to income ratio. And when we look at that, it's as simple as it sounds. What is your debt? And then how much income do you make? And then that should tell you what you can afford. Here's the problem with that logic. For many years, if you go back 50, 60 years ago, the overall makeup of expenses incurred on a monthly basis for a given family is vastly different than it is now. So really the only things that matter to a lender and should have mattered to a lender would be debt and income, because more people had debt and less expenses. There weren't cell phones, wasn't cable TV, there wasn't your Netflix subscription, there wasn't daycare, because in most households it was one working person. So you had a lot of good things about mortgages being calculated that way back then. Now, in my humble opinion, it is doing the opposite. So it is inadequately preparing home buyers to know what their true housing affordability is. And if you want to get mad at something, look up on YouTube the videos from after the housing crisis when they were interviewing big banks about why they were lending to people who on paper really should have never gotten a mortgage in the first place. And what their overwhelming consensus was they should know better, right? Like, we're here to provide a product to them. We're not fiduciaries, right? So we have no accountability to actually advise them. They give us the metrics in which we ask for, and based on our formula, we tell them what our formula tells us that they can afford. If they can't afford that, then they should know that. When the truth is, most of the time, people go to a bank or a lender and assume that they're going to tell you what you can actually afford. There are two ways to look at this. One is, a lot of times people will say, well, what do you currently pay in rent? So if you're renting, what's your rent a month? And they'll say, okay, well, I'm paying $1,200 a month. I would probably be comfortable with a mortgage payment of $1,200 a month. The problem with that logic is that when you are renting a home or an apartment or a townhome, whatever, you're not responsible for your own expenses. If your HVAC goes out, you call your landlord, right? If something breaks, you call your landlord. Anything that happens in the house, to the house, you call your landlord. And your landlord is responsible for fixing it. They have to, because they rent the property to you. When you own the property, everything is up to you. So what we see in a lot of cases is, and the main reason why foreclosure keeps happening at such volumes as it does, is because people go into loans in many circumstances with no cash reserves. They have no money in the bank, right? They're already living paycheck to paycheck. They get a FHA loan or some type of government-backed loan where they put no money down onto the property, so they have no equity in it either. They got that down payment as a gift, more than likely. And then once they start making payments, they're so tightly squeezed because the debt to income ratio gave them, let's say that it told them they could afford a $250,000 house, when really, when you take all their expenses into account, they really should have bought a $175,000 house. And so they're strapped every month and having a hard time making their payments, one emergency situation happens, whether it's medical, whether it's something in the house breaks, regardless of what it is, they instantly can't make their mortgage payment because they have no money readily available. So there are a few things that we want to advise on here. Number one, when you are going in to purchase a home, I would suggest two things primarily. One, save for a down payment. I am a firm believer that is, it's a tried and true thing, and some people say it's antiquated, but it is the safest way to purchase a home. And number two, make sure that you have some form of cash reserves. I like to say at least 4 months of what you currently make should be somewhere in an account. A lot of people feel very discouraged by that, which I understand. So they may look at that and say, well, how am I supposed to, am I never gonna be able to have a house? How can I save all of this money for a down payment, all of this money for my cash reserves? Well, the best way to do that is to work out your budget. And budgeting ahead of time is what helps people win long-term with anything, really. What I wanna do is look at what a lender would give you a loan for if you had certain qualifications, right? So let's say that you make $50,000 a year, and I'm using my screen as a reference point. So if you made $50,000 a year after your federal withholding, your Social Security, your Medicare, your South Carolina taxes or taxes wherever you are, this is specifically for South Carolina, so if you're in a different state, your income taxes may be higher, but it shows your net pay at $1,424.70, so $1,425 roughly. They are going to look not at your net. So I bring home, my paycheck is for $1,425 roughly. But my gross pay at $50,000 a year is $1,923.08. And that doesn't seem like a big difference, but it is in aggregate, because I'm going to use the gross pay. They don't look at your net pay after taxes, nor do they look at your net income after your expenses. So they're going to weigh your true debt to income. So in this case, your income would be $1,923, right? And they're gonna look at all of your debt. So what is debt, or what is considered to be debt? Credit cards, obviously, are the first thing that come to people's minds. There are different requirements now for student loans. That's normally one that's thrown right out there. The government-backed mortgages now actually don't really take student loans into account. Like they're weighed, but they're not weighed as heavily. So you wanna be aware of that. These can be car notes, any other homes that you own. If you've got, a Belk store card or a Kohl's store card or something, those things are all considered debt. So anything that you've got sitting that you owe money to people, you've borrowed money and you owe it back, is all considered to be your debt. Then your gross pay, which like we said, at the $50,000 a year, then they give you your number, right? And the problem with this, I have a really difficult time. It's probably one of the topics that makes me the most heated because it's one of the biggest disservices to the public. They're just going to take those two numbers, mash them together, and give you what your affordability is. And a lot of people think, no big deal. I don't have to worry about that too much because I know what I can afford and I don't really need anybody to tell me what I can afford, right? So if the lender told me that I could afford $1,300 a month, I would say there's no way I could afford that. But the majority of people don't have the knowledge, nor have they sat down and actually done the work to figure out what they should be paying a month. And that makes a huge difference. So let's look at let's talk about the things that we should account for. So number one is look at your actual net income. What do you bring home on your paycheck, right? That of course is number one. Number two, you obviously have to take your debt into account because the lender is going to take it into account. So you want to know what money do you owe that you have to pay back, and what are those monthly payments to pay down that debt. And then lastly, and most importantly, is expenses. Your expense load is, I promise you, 10 times, if not more, heavier than if you would go all the way back into the 30s, 40s, 50s, even 60s. Because now you need to look at how much are you paying for your cell phone bill? How much are you paying for internet, for daycare? Daycare is a huge expense that's not even calculated into affordability. I know in a lot of classes I've taught before, some people were paying upwards of $1,200 a month or more in childcare. And that is something that you should figure in, right? Things like insurance, car upkeep, what you're typically spending on like your going out or fun money, I guess. There's a bunch of different apps out there that can do a good job at helping you with this. You can go through your bank. Sometimes your bank has kind of your spending features. Mint is also great, M-Y-N-T. You can download your information into Mint. It will kind of break down your expenses into a pie chart and show you where you're spending your money and give you an idea of like how to control your spending better. Once you have an idea of what your expenses are, you want to add all of those together with your debt obligations, take whatever you bring home, and of course subtract that number from it. Whatever you have left over is not what you should pay for your mortgage. If you want to, depending on your goals, have some form of savings goal, then you need to also incorporate that into your budgeting, right? So if I want to save 20% of my income a month, for example, then I need to make sure that I take my income minus my debt, minus my expenses, minus my savings metric, minus a buffer. So a buffer is there to protect you, right? You got sick with the flu and you had to pay more for medicine, or one of your children broke an arm and you had to go to the ER. Whatever happens, you at least have some form of buffer each month to account for. And what this will do is give you an idea of what your real monthly mortgage payment should be. And this is so critical when you're going to talk to lenders, because then you can help guide and lead the discussion. So I would strongly suggest going through, building out like your actual budget sheet, figuring out, okay, where am I now? Where do I want to be? What kind of house would like fit what I'm trying to do in my life? And what can I truly afford that will not only put me in a good position now, but in the future? And then be patient, work your plan, and then buy a home. Hopefully you guys found this helpful. And make sure that you follow the channel and hit the bell to subscribe. We want to keep seeing you week after week. Send us suggestions on things you want us to talk about, and we'll see you next time. Bye.